Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Social Housing Roundtable. Great to have so many people with us already for what I think could be quite a fascinating discussion today. And actually, Claire and I have talked about this a number of times in terms of how we can bring this to the table. So I'm really glad we're able to get it in this year, because trying to find gaps in the 2024 calendar has been a bit of a challenge. So I'm delighted we can bring it in today. For those who don't know me, welcome to the Social Housing Roundtable. We do this every single Tuesday at 11 a.m. So it's lovely to have so many of you with us already. My name's Matt Baird. I've been recruiting in the social housing space now for over 13 years, including with some of you fantastic people in the room who've worked with me. So thank you, because it's that support that you give me in terms of working with me on a recruitment front that allows me to keep running this free and available to everybody. So I really, really do appreciate it. I'm also the co-chair of the board for Spring Housing in Birmingham, something I've got an absolute honour and privilege to be of, and have been for the last couple of years. And I've been at a number of events and conferences this year where you may have seen me in various guises. The Social Housing Roundtable was set up 4 years ago with the idea of bringing together really true and authentic discussion on a massive range of topics in the social housing space. And I'm delighted we've done about 135 sessions. We've had more than 1,000 people join us this year. The mailing list is at about 1,500 people now. So brilliant to have you all with us. If you are interested in joining on further discussions and you're not part of the mailing list or anything, do please reach out. But the important thing is that today is if you want to get involved, your voice is absolutely welcome, whether you've been in housing for 5 minutes or 50 years. Use the chat box, raise your hand once we've done the presentation alongside Claire. We want to hear from you. And as long as it's respectful, please feel free to disagree or challenge. We want different points of view on this. So again, thank you so much for being with us today. I'm going to allow Claire to introduce herself. To those who've been on the roundtable for a while will recognise Claire. I'm delighted to be able to welcome her back. And for us to do something along the lines of scrutiny today, I think could be a really powerful session. So Claire, I'm going to pass over to you to kick off today's discussion. As I say, while Claire's speaking, if you have got points or questions you'd like to raise, please put them in the chat box. And then afterwards, we'll have plenty of time for a more open discussion where we'd love to invite you to come in and join us. So Claire, without further ado, over to you.
Brilliant. Right. Is that sharing?
It is at the moment. It's kind of like if you go on to I don't know, it's called like presentation mode, I think is the word I'm looking for.
There we go. There. Is that all right? Is that doing it?
Yes, we're in. Brilliant.
Right, brilliant. Okay, so hello everybody. My name's Claire Blacka. I have worked in both supported and social housing for over 25 years. And I'm proud to say that I was very interested in involvement and engagement before it was trendy. I probably wasn't doing it very well at the time, but certainly made the effort right from the beginning. So I used to work for a national housing association where I was their head of customer engagement, and then got made redundant last year and thought that I would give it a go on my own. Obviously, I need to pay my bills, but my main motivation is a genuine desire to change things for the better. And the reason that I called my consultancy Tentacles, and you can see the tentacles there on the screen, is because I think that engagement should reach into every part of the business like tentacles. So that's just a little bit about me. So I wanted to talk about scrutiny today because obviously it's front and centre of the engagement agenda at the moment. And the regulator of social housing has said that typically what they expect to do is go in, ask further questions, talk to the board and everything, but they will want to observe a tenant scrutiny committee or something of that ilk. It doesn't have to be that name. And we'll want to talk to them and ask them questions. And I thought that was really interesting because I suspect that there is a lot going on in the sector, but under different names. So we've got committees, we've got panels, and loads of different ways of reaching into boards. And I think there are probably three sort of categories of organisation there. So there are people who've got effective, confident scrutiny groups that would feel happy to be observed by the regulator of social housing and would know what to say in response if they were interviewed or had a chat with them or whatever. I think there are other organisations that have something like a panel or a committee or a scrutiny group, but it's not quite doing what the organisation or, more importantly, the tenants want it to do. it maybe doesn't have the power that it needs to have. It's maybe not addressing the issues that the tenants feel it needs to address. And then there'll be a third group where this might be a new idea to them, or something they've not done or put on the back burner, or it's not worked, and they're starting from scratch. Thank you. So I'm really lucky in that I've worked with some excellent people in the past, in both terms of both tenants and colleagues. And I saw one of my old colleagues, Julie, on here today. So hello, Julie. And I've been able to gather information from them. I've also got at Tentacles an expert panel where I've got a few people who live in social housing now, and they sort of keep me right. And I met with them and asked them what they thought about scrutiny. They would have liked to be in here today, but there've been some other things that meant that they couldn't get here. So I'm going to tell you what they said. So we had a discussion about their experience of scrutiny and what it has been. So what they said is, in the past, it's been very focused on what's going wrong, what are the gaps in performance. At scrutiny groups they've been to, there's been a lot of data, and it's been a traditional style meeting where everybody sits around a table and discusses the data. And scrutiny has had a feeling of, well, we'll do it if we must. And then you go down that kind of tick box exercise where you're doing it just so that the regulator will leave you alone. So we had a talk about that, and obviously those things felt rather negative. What I will say is that those people that I talked to had a lovely time doing scrutiny, that it was something that they enjoyed. I think the important thing to consider, though, is that they were people who felt confident dealing with data, and didn't have any sort of disabilities or reasonable adjustments that would prevent them from managing data or from sitting round a table for quite a long time. So although those feelings about the past were quite negative, they'd actually had quite a nice time doing it. But then we talked about, well, what would your wish list be? And they said that actually they would also like to spend more time thinking about what's going well. And they felt that that's important because we can accidentally lose things that are going well if we don't talk about them. They also wanted to be able to celebrate things. And rather than sitting around a table and scrutinising things, they wanted to go out in the field. They wanted to spend time in communities, in new buildings, with maintenance teams, for example, seeing how it works rather than relying on paper and data. And they wanted to find interesting and participative ways of looking at the data, at the information. So we don't want to get away from data, and we talk about data quite a lot in the social housing sector and how important it is. But rather than just lots of printouts, are there different ways that we can do things? And they also wanted to see a diversity of ideas. So a lot of scrutiny panels we expect scrutiny panels to invest a lot of time and effort. And that means that the people who join scrutiny panels tend to be people who have a little bit more time and can make that effort. And that means that there sometimes is a little bit of a lack of diversity. Now, I would argue that that's fine, because when I've been challenged on that by senior leaders who've said, it's the same old faces doing scrutiny, I've challenged them back and said, well, are you on the PTA at your local school? Do you do any volunteering? Have you joined another board? And often they'll say, oh no, I haven't got time. And I think, well, exactly. If we're asking people to scrutinise and we're asking them to do it well, it will take time, and we need to accept that. I think the diversity of ideas is how that group can be a conduit to other people. So how can they spread out what they're doing in terms of scrutiny and get other views in? So that's the wish list. The biggest concern of the people that I talked to about scrutiny was the impressions of staff, especially those who were at the front line working with tenants day to day. And they said that scrutiny feels like a fearful word. It feels like you're looking for something that the colleagues have done wrong, and you're going to correct them. And in fact, one of the people that I talked to said that he'd spoken to a colleague who was frightened that she was going to get sacked because she'd been scrutinised, or her work had been scrutinised. Not because she'd done anything wrong, just because of how she felt about that word. And just last week, I was starting up a scrutiny panel at a supported housing association, and there were a couple of members of staff there to support some of the people who were using services. And one of them said, you know, it just feels like you're trying to catch me out. It feels like you're waiting behind a door, and the minute I take a step wrong, you're going to find me out. And scrutiny generally doesn't have any positives about it. And obviously, when you have that level of fear, it leads to less engagement and less encouragement. So staff are not going to feel comfortable being open about what's right, but also what's wrong. And they're not going to encourage the tenants that they meet in the community to be part of that scrutiny because of the fear of what that will become. And I think that's where we need to think about the rebrand of scrutiny. I do think it's a strange word, scrutiny. It always reminds me of a prickly little hedgehog, not a cute one like Mrs. Tiggywinkle, like a really prickly little hedgehog that is quite difficult. But it is the word that the regulator of social housing is using, and I firmly believe in calling things what they are. So it's not about shying away from problems. It's about rebranding that word and thinking about balance. And I also think that that will have a positive impact on the tenants who are involved in scrutiny, because we're continually getting people in a room and saying, what do you think is wrong with everything? And although some people do enjoy it and they get a lot out of it, and there are lots of positives to it, I just think it's a bit soul destroying to constantly talk about the problems. And it would be good to talk about what's going right as well. I also think there's an issue about representing our communities. So that traditional method of scrutiny of sitting around a table and looking at lots of data does exclude people who struggle with reading, who struggle with sitting still for a long time, who struggle with concentration. And actually, those people are overrepresented in social housing. So they should have more representation in our scrutiny panels. So I think we need to think of different ways of engaging people who have different reasonable adjustments. And they are reasonable, and I think it's something that can be done. And I'm going to talk about that in a minute. Okay, so to me, engagement is all about culture. You have to have the right culture, and if you've not got the right culture, any engagement you do will never totally work. And I like to think that engagement is everyone's responsibility, which is kind of the key principle behind most health and safety policies. It's everybody's responsibility. If you spot something that's not right, you are responsible for reporting that, possibly doing something about it. And I think engagement should be the same way. And when I say everyone's responsibility, I don't just mean those people who regularly come into contact with tenants. I mean the people who work in the back office, the finance team, the IT team, because everything a housing providers organisation does eventually ends up impacting on the tenants. So we need to think about it in a more rounded way. And if we can do that, then we will welcome scrutiny in a bit more, because we will want to know what our tenants think about what we're doing, what's working, what's not working, what could we change, what could we improve, what could we get rid of. And I think those are all questions that more people would ask if everybody saw engagement as a whole responsibility, rather than sort of allocating it to the front line or to an engagement team, or kind of separating it off as somebody else's responsibility. And I think just a last point on that, I think there are great opportunities for collaboration in there. If we're all working in that way, we can collaborate better with our tenants, we can collaborate better with each other, and potentially come up with more innovative solutions when we do have problems that we've identified. So I would like to propose that we all rebrand scrutiny and we think about it in these ways, which I've listed here. So collaborative, which I've just touched on. So we work together with colleagues to make life better and easier for everyone. So when I say we, I mean the all colleagues and the scrutiny groups. So we make it better and easier for everyone, and we make sure that colleagues are included, particularly the colleagues who are going to be affected by any decisions, because their views are important too. We want it to be inclusive, so panels and committees are a conduit to reaching other customers or tenants, and colleagues are not to rely on engagement colleagues for all engagement activities. Inclusion also comes from the next one, which is making it interesting and fun. Do we need loads of paper for everybody to read? Can we interact differently with key data? Can we show people rather than tell them by using field trips or using sort of games or different ways of doing things that shows people? Can we get information from existing meetings? So like a lot of people have tenants and residents meetings. Can we use them to find out more without having to do this thing where we sit around a table? Identify the problems and the positives. So let's cut everybody some slack and let's think about what's good. And actually, I'm about to do some training actually in something called appreciative inquiry, which is where we concentrate on everything that does work. And I've not done the training yet, but my understanding of it is that by concentrating on what does work, you start to automatically realize what doesn't work and you get rid of it and you keep and build on the things that are positive. So we can have a different perspective. And I think everybody would feel better if we were doing that, which is not to shy away from the problems, but it's about a different way of looking at things. I think scrutiny panels also need to have commissioning power. So by that, I mean that they might scrutinise a subject, but in a couple of hours in a meeting or on a field trip or whatever, no matter how fun and interest you make it, might not be enough. So scrutiny panels need to have the ability to say, right, we want to look at this in more depth, and this is what we need to do it. And we task a person or a group of people to go and find out more and to come back and tell us what that means, so that this scrutiny panel are really scrutinising, not just looking at that surface or looking at what colleagues think they might want to see. And then the last one, and I think this one is one that's really missing, is let's tell everyone about what we're doing. So I think this argument that people are not interested in scrutiny or they haven't got the time or they haven't got the capacity, I think is a great myth. I think the problem is that people don't necessarily understand scrutiny or they think it's a negative thing. And actually, if we started to tell everybody about what we'd been doing in our scrutiny groups, how that had changed things, what that felt like for the people affected by the change, more and more people would become interested. More and more people would have faith that scrutiny makes a difference. And more people would feel satisfied that the organisation was listening to them and meeting that consumer standard around being transparent and accountable. And the other word has completely gone out of my head. I do apologise, but you know the one. So I just wanted to finish my presentation, just focusing a little bit more on the interesting and fun, with a bit of a call to action, really. So what I'd never want to do is have fun for fun's sake. Not when we're in scrutiny groups. The rest of the time, totally have fun for fun's sake. So I don't want to compromise the outcomes of what we're scrutinising. But I'd like us to work together to think about how we can get the information we need in different ways. And I've just got 3 pictures here of things that I've done recently. So the first one is a card game that I invented, which was with an organisation called Horton. And Horton didn't feel that their customers knew very much about involvement or engagement. And rather than me just standing at the front of a room and telling them about it, what we did is we wrote down lots of different ways that you can get involved and engaged on cards. And the first part of the game, we asked them to sort the cards into things that they thought absolutely Horton should do, things they thought they shouldn't, and things that they weren't sure about or needed more explanation. And then after that, we spread all the cards out on the table like they are there, and we asked people to put stickers on up to 5 things that they would personally like to be involved with. And that gave us a really good picture of what people were interested in, and also led to more discussion rather than, as I say, me just standing at the front of the room. The second one there, if you follow me on LinkedIn, you'll see that I've talked quite a lot about a product that I've developed called Game of Homes. And that is a way of gamifying involvement. So in Game of Homes, you start with a problem and then we work through a series of activities that are quite structured, that come up with some solutions and action plans that we then give to the organisation to develop. And the feedback that we had from that, my favourite piece of feedback is a guy who is living in supported housing who said that he didn't think he was able to have good ideas. And he ended up winning Game of Homes because there are points for being the most inspirational person. So he won it. And he said that it made him feel amazing and it made him realise that actually he does have good ideas. And he's never realised it before, and he now knows how to bring them out a bit better. And then the third one is one example of collages that I've done. They're actually part of Game of Homes, but I use them separately as well. And they're about getting people to represent how they want something to look, what's their ideal. So we use pictures, we use words. If people are particularly artistic, they can draw, and I just sort of lay it out on all the table. And usually people come towards the table with the idea of a collage in mind, with a lot of trepidation. But what I've found is usually the person who is most reluctant to do the collage is the one that goes mad with the glue stick. And it just, again, gets people to think about things differently, and you get loads of rich information. And we do it on a big piece of wallpaper. So you've often got people working at opposite ends who are doing the same thing. So then you start to be able to bring out themes, you start to see what's really important. So they're just 3 ideas, as I say, of things that I've done recently, where there are opportunities to kind of think about getting information across and receiving information in slightly different ways that feel much more interesting and much more inclusive than reading a lot of paper and looking at pie charts. So my last sort of request is, what I was thinking of doing is using LinkedIn to set up a collaborative space to share ideas. So that we can all talk about how we scrutinise things, how we get groups together, and we can borrow each other's ideas rather than working in silos. And I wanted some feedback really on whether you thought that were a good idea, whether you'd join in or you'd recommend it to somebody where it feels more relevant. And then hopefully we can sort of rebrand scrutiny into something more positive, more collaborative, more fun, which is a word certainly never synonymous with scrutiny before. But yeah, let me know your thoughts. I've completely lost my thread there. I do apologise for the stuttering. And that is the end of my presentation. It would be great if we could connect on LinkedIn. I'd love to hear about your ideas and your thoughts about scrutiny. And I will stop sharing my screen so I can see all your lovely faces.
Thank you so much, Claire. And I know we've got a couple of hands up already, but I want to go to some of the points in the chat. And actually, there's been a lot of really kind of positive points made based on your presentation. So firstly, a massive thank you for sharing your insight and your thoughts. Couple of points that came to, I'm going to go through a little bit chronologically before I come to Brian, Steve, and anybody else who'd like to join in. So what would be your definition of tenant-led, and how sensitive is the role of the facilitator? Were two questions put forward by John Townend. I don't know what your thoughts are.
So I think it depends on the confidence of the group, what the definition of tenant-led is. So when I'm working with organisations, one thing I always put in my proposal is that this proposal is not set in stone and it will change depending on what your tenants say. So my definition of tenant-led is what they want and what they feel comfortable with. And that tends to change over time. So, for example, the tenant group I'm doing at the moment, I'm chairing it and I am setting the agenda because it's their first time at scrutiny and they're not terribly sure about it. But what we've already done is said, right, now you know a little bit about scrutiny, what kind of things would you like to scrutinise? And the next session, we're going to take all those things and we're going to do a prioritisation exercise so that they can decide what they want to do next. Over time, where we'd like to move to is that they chair it, they set the agenda, and someone like me is just around in case they get stuck or they need support. And another thing that I talk a lot about when I'm working with people is the balance of power. So at the moment, the housing organisation has all the power. They decide who lives in their properties, how long you get to stay, what you do when you're in there, and we need to make sure that we share that power. And one way to do that is through a scrutiny group. So we need to make sure that we define what that power is. So if the scrutiny group is going to make recommendations, for example, we need to make sure that it's clear how seriously those recommendations are taken, and what people are going to do with them, how they're going to feed back. I absolutely think the role of the facilitator is it needs to be a sensitive role, and I think that we need to sort of balance out the needs of people, make sure people feel heard, but also scrutiny is not about people's individual issues. So I think a facilitator needs to, if somebody sort of gets caught up in their own issue and sort of runs away with it, if you like, it's about making sure that that's addressed, but in the right space. So I do think there is a skill to being a facilitator, but I definitely think it's something that many tenants are able to do, and so there is no reason why, when they feel confident enough, they can't run that scrutiny group themselves.
Fantastic. I mean, some of the points that are raised, and I'm going to bring in Brian. So Colin Lincoln has said, I found scrutiny being selective when invited to scrutinise by landlords. Simon Phillips has said, do we think the scrutiny is different from engagement? Scrutiny for some implies a more detailed examination of something, but engagement can be something more informal. Sophie, do you think it's important to keep the difference in mind between scrutiny as an overarching purpose of tenant engagement versus specific scrutiny review? And Neil Goodrich, culture is fundamental. It goes back to your points being made on fear factor earlier. You don't fear scrutiny in an open problem-solving environment, you welcome it. And John fully agrees. Engagement must be embedded throughout the organisation. That ensures all staff buy into the process.
This episode of the Social Housing Roundtable is sponsored by Alertacall. Alertacall helps as many people as possible feel safe, connected and informed by combining ingenious technology and award-winning human contact. Alertacall's digital engagement solution helps social landlords proactively know their customers and properties by putting a portable touchscreen in every home, offering a daily property check through the optional OK Each Day service, plus repairs reporting, tenant surveys and much more. They also provide Beyond Warden Calls, an easier, simpler and lower cost wireless warden call solution with video door entry, dispersed telecare and smoke alarms. Alertacall works with over 60 housing providers across the UK to enhance two-way engagement between customers and landlords. In 2022, Alertacall won the Queen's Award for Enterprise and Innovation, and in 2023 won Housing Supplier of the Year. I'm delighted to have them as our sponsor of the Social Housing Roundtable throughout 2024.
I'm going to bring in Brian. Lovely to have you with us today. Do please kind of raise your thoughts.
Thanks very much for that presentation, Claire. There's certainly a couple of people that I would like to send it to, particularly when it comes to involvement and engagement. And I think that's probably where scrutiny falls down, is that it's seen as a little bit of a room by itself, away from the rest of the engagement and the organization. And it's there in a lot of cases, yes, because it has to be there. The regulator will ask questions, and it's funny that you talk about it, because my understanding is that one of the reasons they want to speak to scrutiny and tenants is because when they went to an organization in the early stages, it was a scrutiny meeting they went to, and the scrutiny group was presented with a whole load of paperwork and information and everything else. And the regulator asked the staff to leave, and asked the scrutiny group, do you normally get all this information? They said it's the first time in months that they've had any information. And it was all because the regulator was there. But I think it's important, the embedding of engagement in the organization and an understanding from people that it's looking at the service that in essence they're paying for.
Yeah.
So it's tenants looking at the service that's been given to them. In some cases it mightn't be working, in some cases it's working perfectly. And I think what does happen is that the scrutiny group sometimes picks too big a topic, and they get bogged down in that topic. It would be, one of the things would be communication. It's a big word, but it's also a huge topic. You could spend months and years looking at it.
And housing associations are themselves, aren't they, Brian? And this
is so it's making sure that the group understand that picking little bits and having a look at it may be better than trying to pick a big subject. One of the things that I was involved in was National Federation of Almos was putting together a guide, critical friend. And sometimes maybe that's the better word for a scrutiny group. We're your critical friends. We will look and see, and we will tell you when you're right, but we'll also tell you when you're wrong.
I'm going to bring in Claire, Brian, because I want to make sure we're from loads of voice day. But
I'll put the link in the chat.
Can I just respond quickly to something Brian has said and in the comments about the difference between scrutiny and engagement and all those kind of things. So I think scrutiny is just one part of engagement. I don't love the word engagement, because I think engagement covers lots of different things, and actually what we're looking at is involvement. We're looking at when tenants have a say that influences change or even affirmation in an organisation, where engagement can be having a cup of tea and talking about the weather, but that's the word that the regulator uses. But yeah, scrutiny, I think it's a bit like a pyramid, and scrutiny is at the top of the pyramid because it's quite technical and it has some power, and then you've got all these other different parts of engagement that go down this pyramid, but should all feed back up into that scrutiny. So what's going on at the lowest level of engagement, which I would say is just being out on your estates and talking to your tenants, whatever's going on there should get back up to the scrutiny group, and they should be looking at that to see what that means.
And the case, I mean, John Talland's put in the chat there, why should scrutiny be confrontational? If it does, then the fear factor will arise. Better to use the nudge theory to make suggestions for adjustments to processes and policy. And Arthur sang, scrutiny and tenancy involvement must absolutely be owned by the whole organisation. It's a question before I go to Steve. Claire, what are vital views on where the delivery of this should sit, as it has to sit somewhere? He's seen it with governance teams, community development teams, business improvement teams. Where do you think that scrutiny and tenancy involvement ownership should sit? Because as much as it touches every part of the business, someone has to take a lead.
Yeah. I mean, I actually think it should be around the governance area. But I think the important thing that somebody touched on, I've forgotten who it was, is that it needs to be done by the right person. So it needs to be done by a facilitator who is good at that kind of thing. And if you've not got somebody in your governance team that can do that, then it needs to go to the best person, because ultimately the comfort and confidence of the tenants is the most important thing about scrutiny. And I also think that there should be key links with boards and with the senior leadership team. And I think, again, sometimes I've seen that be a little bit tokenistic. And what I would really like to see is a member of the scrutiny group being on the board of housing associations, not just talking to someone from the board, and then because that just ends up in Chinese whispers. And I think we actually need to have confidence in our people to be able to do that.
I agree with you completely. And actually, I don't think she's with us today, but I've met Kai Jackson recently and had a number of chats with her. And she said, "Can I please stop being called a tenant board member and just be called a board member?" So
Yes.
I'm not the recruitment board member. I am a board member. And why do we immediately stigmatise tenant? Steve, I'm going to bring you in, and then I'm going to a couple points in the chat, and I'll go to Neil, and then wherever we go next. But Steve, over to you.
Yeah, morning, Matt. A good presentation, Claire.
Thank you, Steve.
Just a couple of points. You mentioned the fear factor from staff about any comments a scrutiny panel could make during the meetings. Personally, I think the panels should be. I don't think staff should be at every meeting, because the fear factor goes both ways. I've spoken to tenants where their landlord has set up a scrutiny panel, and then the landlord gives them the document and says, read through that and sign it, without any discussion. And the tenants are concerned to speak up because, a black mark against them. So I think the tenants should be free to have an open discussion amongst themselves with no staff available.
Well, the tenants should be deciding who is at the scrutiny meeting.
Sure, but at some point you need to have staff there, because during the scrutiny you may say, well, why don't we look at this and change this and do this, do that? But for business operational reasons, that may not be possible.
But I think still the tenants should be deciding who is there and what their purpose is and when it's time for them to go. So if you want to say, as tenants, right, we've heard what you've got to say. We'd like to have a discussion without you here, and then if you could come back in 30 minutes, and then we'll tell you the outcome of
Exactly.
that's kind of going back to that definition of tenant-led. Actually, you're deciding how your meeting is going to work. And I think the facilitator it's difficult because obviously they're still an employee of the organisation, but they need to.
Why not have an independent facilitator?
Well, obviously, as a consultant, I would totally advocate that, but that would be a little bit naughty of me to just tell myself. So I'm totally willing to be but consultants cost money, and we need to be realistic. And I, as much as I would love everybody to want me to come and independently facilitate their meetings, that's not practical. So you need to make sure that your facilitator is somebody who's confident to represent the needs and wants of the tenants and not just fall into line with the organisation. And again, I mentioned Julie is here somewhere. I had a team of people, including Julie, who were totally willing to do that because we'd employed the right people. But it does take a bit of guts. So you need to make sure that your facilitator is sensitive in one sort of part of their role, but also is a bit gutsy as well, and not afraid to speak up. But that goes back to the culture, doesn't it? And you need to have that open, transparent culture where you're willing to be challenged, and I'm willing to be surprised. Scrutiny never fails to surprise me.
Yeah, but you've also got to take the organisations to task that say we want a scrutiny panel. Here's the documents, now sign it.
Yeah.
I mean,
come back to that one in a moment. I'm going to bring in Neil.
Sorry, can I just make one more point?
If you're quick, Steve.
Quickly, yeah. You mentioned about people haven't got time to sit on the scrutiny panels. I think this is where the field trips come in, because a scrutiny panel can get out there, go and talk to other tenants who may not have the 10, 15, 20 hours to do a complete panel, but they can still have an input into that subject that's being scrutinised.
Yeah.
And again, have those field trips where you don't have staff around, because again, you've got that tenants are more likely to be open and honest with other tenants than they are if there's a member of staff there.
I'll come back to that in a moment, but thank you, Steve. I completely agree with your point there. And Neil, I'm going to come to yourself. I know there's a few points in the chat I was going to raise, but you've decided to raise your hand and we'd love to hear from you.
No worries. I think one of the key pieces missing for organisations when it comes to scrutiny is aligning it with its broader improvement and assurance programme. So you'll often have concurrent activities going on where there'll be continuous improvement looking at, let's pick the obvious one, repairs, and then there'll be a scrutiny focus on repairs, and they don't necessarily align. My role, SNG, is that critical friend. So I'm head of customer performance and improvement. I hold the group director for customer to account on performance, but also on improvement activities being delivered. Within my directorate, well, it's not mine, but the directorate I operate in, we have customer engagement now, and that sits under a customer experience director. So you have that focal point for the organisation from a buy-in and a structure point of view. The next step is to working on aligning how we deliver out first line, second line and third line assurance activity, because what scrutiny should be, going back to the point I made in the chat, is it's not a telling off, it's a deep understanding of where we are from an organizational point of view, from the viewpoint of people who engage with and use our services. Because as providers, we'll have an idea of what we think things are, but the reality might be different. What we want are capable, independent, challenging individuals who can ask us all good questions, like saying, well, you said you're going to improve this year on year, it hasn't. Why? But that needs to be aligned with a more structured program across the piece so that you're not replicating effort, but you're building on what has been done before. And it's something I think many organizations don't quite get right yet, because frankly, they're still not making the connection between performance, improvement and scrutiny that they need to.
And I think it ties in really well, actually, the question raised by Liz Williams, which is, what do you think the key issue is regarding trust by the public with scrutiny? And I think that probably ties in exactly with your point there, Neil. And Claire, I don't know what your thoughts are to both Liz's question and to Neil's point there.
Yeah, well, I mean, I agree with everything Neil said, and so I won't repeat it because he said it more eloquently than me.
He's making friends everywhere.
Yeah, but I also think in terms of trust, that last point that I made on rebranding scrutiny about telling everyone. So I think a lot of organisations do some really good scrutiny actually, and then don't tell anybody that they've done it. Not even the people who did the scrutiny. They're closing the feedback loop just seems to be really poor. And I think part of that is that often you've identified a problem and you've solved it, or it's come from a problem. So to tell everybody about it, you have to admit that you've done something wrong. And I think housing is afraid to admit that it's done something wrong. But that's what our tenants want to know. I've had lots of feedback from tenants who get the magazines or read the website, and they're all about what all these wonderful things their housing provider have done, and they're all true, but actually it starts to lose its efficacy because there is nothing in there about what's gone wrong. So people start to get suspicious of it, and I think people have more respect when organizations can say, do you know what, we got this wrong, but this is how we handled it, and now it's going right. And then people have more trust, and then they're more willing to spend the time because they know it makes a difference, and it's just a catalyst for more and more people wanting to engage with the process.
And it's a point actually made by Mandy Holt in the chat, which was that she says she works with her group to find out what they want to do, what they want to say, record their feedback carefully, write reports for those who aren't confident or don't have time, but work closely to ensure that they reflect their feedback and ideas. And it's that then going, well, how are we then promoting that? What happens next after that, which is really, really interesting. Sue, I'm going to bring you in. Lovely to have you with us today.
Well, it is going back to culture, but what we sell it as, we're improving tenants' lives, we're improving work practices, and we're improving staff quality of job. because it does, if you're doing scrutiny well, it should do all three things. It should improve the staff, the outcome, and the outcome for the tenants, the work practices. But we write all our own documents, we set our own agendas, we choose our own scrutiny. But the thing we do is we constantly talking to officers. We don't, from the results we get, we don't automatically make a decision where we think it needs to be. We will then go and have that discussion with officers. You know, I'll do a report on sort of, for instance, how we're going to do wider engagement. I put that out, and from that discussion, from my report, new things come back from officers. It's that collaboration, and speaking honestly. So when we start a scrutiny project, every time we start one, the first thing I do is go round the table with the scrutineers, and I want you to be honest and tell us exactly how it is for you. And that's the last time they can then have a personal input. But at least we've got a baseline of what we're looking at. And then we go out to wider tenants and ask for their views. It's honestly, it's a partnership, and we work so well together.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. The object of scrutiny is for things to be better for everybody involved. We've all got the same goal, haven't we? And I think we've lost sight of that a little
And
bit.
that's what you need to sell when you're actually doing scrutiny. You're actually improving it for the organisation, for the staff, and for the tenants. It's all three. If you're doing it well, it improves all three.
I absolutely love what you just said about having a round table of what it's like for you, so that everybody gets their personal things off their chest. I'm going to steal that, Susan. Thank you.
Okay, then, thanks.
Thank you very much, Sue. John, I was going to raise your point about scrutiny is now, according to the regulator, part of governance, so it reflects it, etc. But you've got your hand up, and we'd love to hear from you. So do please come in. You're on mute at the moment.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Matt. It's just something that we came across when we were doing scrutiny. The topic that we decided to do was complaints and the surveys. We wanted to try and get the information and try and see if there were any themes that were going on with damp and mold and the number of complaints that's arising. Seeking that information from staff was a really problematical process. And one of the things that we suggested was the role of the facilitator. When you're using signatures within your emails, you have Mrs. Fazakali, tenant engagement team, or whatever team you're representing. And we did recommend that the facilitator actually takes a title on their signatures as scrutiny facilitator. And the reason that we suggested that was that scrutiny is now part of governance. It needs to have all its information in a timely process. And the busy lives that officers are leading can sometimes, if it's from staff member A, I'll get back to that later. Whereas if it says scrutiny facilitator, it just brings up the importance. This is part of the governance process. This information needs to be given to the facilitator in a timely manner. In other words, don't leave it 3 weeks. Get it done within the next couple of days.
Yeah, I like that. What was really interesting the other day is last week when I did the scrutiny group at the supported housing, we wanted to think of a name for the group. And I genuinely thought people would go for another name that didn't mention the word scrutiny, because it's not a very appealing or attractive word. And actually, the group decided to call themselves the Scrutiny Group because they thought that it was important that we all understood the word and learnt about the word and made it an important word that people paid attention to, which I thought was a really impressive but surprising result. I like being surprised by tenants and groups and everything that I do, so it was good. But I like that idea as well, that you know, it people's job titles or the way that they sign off includes that as well, because it's just bringing it to the fore all the time, isn't it?
I think to some of those, you may remember it yourself, as a board member of Taro at the time, we started looking at scrutiny when it was first envisaged. And one of the things was scrutiny will fit each individual organisation differently. And that has to be recognised. As long as it, within the process, it's got certain criteria that it hits. How you get to that criteria is up to the group itself. There will be groups that have highly intelligent, well-practiced practitioners on them, and they will drive themselves forward. I understand what you were saying, and I sympathise with you as part of a chair of the scrutiny group, that sometimes they need to be not taught, but brought along in their involvement process and encourage them. And it is all about encouragement.
Yeah.
But it plays a little bit more role on the importance of the organisation.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. So a couple more points from the chat. So there was a point made by Dave Skinner. The regulator at a recent conference seemed pretty open to any methodology orgs used to demonstrate a better partnership and understanding between tenants and housing providers, which was obviously great to hear.
Yeah.
Liz Williams says there, we have the Grenfell and Victoria Klein reports still not implemented years after following explicit scrutiny. How do we ensure scrutiny actually delivers change in an accountable way? And I think this kind of really ties into a lot of the points being made today, which is that, as Manny's put, it shouldn't be about building trust and working together. It's not us and them. We all want improvement. So it should be about building trust. Apologies. And the Dean says, to me, I'm there to help make the service better for the shareholders. It's also important to express what is working well and what's not. I agree the space overall can be more relaxed. And this is followed up by Julia saying, scrutiny to me is part resident engagement. All engagement differs, re formality, time expectations, amount or depth of information, and need of the resident. Both still need to have an effect. Also think scrutiny teams should have access to engagement practices like surveys, walkabouts, staff shadowing, so they engage a resident on their subject. And I think it's really, really interesting. I mean, Candida said, Derek, Red Kite, where tenant-led, the scrutiny is developed a scrutiny framework with 2 documents to define scrutiny principles, what's expected. But yeah, as you go back to Liz's point, which is that there's loads of scrutiny being done, and yet sometimes action still isn't being followed up. And are you seeing this, Claire, with some of the businesses you are working with?
Not so much the businesses I'm working with now, because I think to employ a consultant, you're quite committed to doing things. But I've seen it in the past, and certainly sort of an assumption about tenants that they won't be interested or they don't have the knowledge. A really good example is I did some scrutiny on recharges for damage in properties, and I insisted on doing it, but some of my colleagues didn't want me to do it because they said that tenants would all just go, oh well, no one has to pay it, it'll be fine. Actually, what happened was the tenants were far more strict than the colleagues about it. So these assumptions that we make about what tenants are going to say are often wrong. And the only way to find that out is to do proper engagement, proper scrutiny, and as I say, to be open to being surprised. And what I also find with tenants is that they can always validate their opinion. So even if I don't agree with it, they can always give me a good reason why they want that opinion. And that has not always been my experience when working with colleagues in the housing sector. That I've come across a lot of, well, we've always done that, so we'll carry on, which is not a valid reason. I've never ever heard a tenant say, well, we've always done that, so we'll just carry on. I'm just going to tell you this just really quickly, but it's something that I use quite a lot, where we compare houses to sausage rolls. So if you go to Greggs and you buy a sausage roll and it's horrible, you've got choices. You never have to go again. You can make your own. You can go somewhere else. You can have a pasty. All sorts of choices. If you are not happy with your housing, your choices are so limited. But you cannot do anything without housing. So you can live without sausage rolls. Most people can anyway. You cannot live without your housing. So it's unlike any other product we consume. So we absolutely must ask the people who are using the product what they think about it and how it's working for them. They don't have other choices. With the housing crisis, they can't just go, well, I'm not going to live with this landlord anymore. I'm going to go live over there. Or I'm going to make my own house. So, that the drive behind scrutiny and engagement on the whole is that lack of choice and is the essential nature of housing.
I agree, and I think it's come down. There's a point there made, which is that a lot of this comes to realization the organisations aren't always as good as they think they are, so become afraid of admitting failure. But we've got about 5 minutes left, and we've got Liz and Candida. So Liz, do please come in.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Sorry, that was a bit cluster Effie. But yes, thank you so much. I think the important thing is on any scrutiny exercise is that at the end you have some core objectives that are written down in black and white on an A4 piece of paper. It's no good going through all these processes and not having an action plan at the end of it, and one that actually has feedback so that you are accountable and you go back and you look at whether you've achieved those objectives in the past. So like a follow-up, like a defects inspection of the work at the end. So that would be my main sort of influence there, I think.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Thank you very much. Candida, over to you. Got your mute at the minute. Hopefully we can bring you in.
In addition to what Liz has just said, I think also to answer the question that was asked earlier in the chat about how do we know the scrutiny is actually delivering the change. It's also worth thinking about doing verification processes. At Red Kite, we have done 2 verification processes which were conducted by independent verifiers. Those verification processes have been very successful. They look at the objectives and action plans, recommendations which were made through the scrutiny process, and how the impact of all the changes that were made. So I think it's something that I can leave it with everybody to just think around those other channels to explore.
Thank you very much. And I can see actually to follow up from that, Sue Healy has put there in the chat that they've developed a tracker document to ensure all recommendations are delivered. And I think it's, you know, I know Red Kite, I'm working with you on a couple of projects at the moment. It's fascinating what you're doing with some of your tenant scrutiny, but also your tenant engagement. I was talking to your team the other day, and every single interview in the business has a tenant at the interview. And that's something that was almost like, yeah, you know, loads of businesses are doing that, but I can assure you that they aren't. So it's really fascinating. So thank you for that, Candida. I don't know if Yvonne Davies is still with us. I know we've only got about a minute left. She made a point earlier about being a fan of appreciative inquiry and use it all the time for review. She was going to share a couple of words on that, but I don't know if Yvonne's still with us.
I'm still here, Matt. Hi.
Please come in.
Really enjoyed everything that I've heard this morning. Yeah, I was just going to say very quickly, I use that 5D model of appreciative inquiry quite a lot. It came from the education sector and they always use it, and councils use it a lot in other methods other than engagement, I think, really. But it's based on 5 Ds, defining what is important to tenants, always keeping the conversation positive, which is exactly what Claire has said. Don't go back on the stories, flip what was negative into what would you like instead, really. So defining what's important, discovering a bit of storytelling, because everybody likes a bit of that, really, and then they're done. But it's about unpicking also stories of greatness and things that people are most proud of as tenants, and the best experiences maybe from the private sector, and bringing them in, really. And then a bit of a dream phase in the next D, which is D number 3, I think, which is about 3 wishes perhaps that residents would have about that service. And you can get it from surveys, you can get it from engaging residents if you're scrutinising. But then designing as a small group of residents, the priorities for change and principles that underpin that, which is why they're important, really, so that that message is heard too. And that's the end of your scrutiny piece, really. The last stage is obviously deliver, which is deliver an action plan, which I think somebody said, Elizabeth perhaps mentioned earlier. So it's quite easy. There's loads of stuff written on it and you can write it yourself, really, depend on how you want to use it, I think. But if you prep some questions, it's really great resident engagement. It keeps it positive and keeps it moving and quite exciting. And I've done it start to finish in a day. So it's quite useful for a piece of short, sharp scrutiny if you can get a tight enough subject to concentrate on.
Thank you very much. So I know we are out of time. So Claire, I'm going to go to you for final words, final thoughts, and a bit of an overview, I guess, of how you found the session today and your takeaways, or what you'd like people to take away from today.
Well, it's I guess the last thing I'd like to say is if you are interested in having a scrutiny group where we can share ideas and practice on LinkedIn, can you put a yes in the chat? And then I can get an idea of whether that's going to work. Don't say yes if you're not interested. It's fine. My feelings will not be hurt. Although my feelings are overjoyed by the yeses that I'm seeing. Thank you very much for your engagement. I've written loads of notes. I've got loads more ideas. I hope I've been of help to you. I'm always willing to chat about it. As you can probably tell, I feel really strongly about engagement in general, but scrutiny as well. So I'm always happy to have a chat. So feel free to get in touch or connect on LinkedIn or whatever. But yeah, thank you very much. And thanks for having me, Matt. I really appreciate it.
You're very, very welcome. I also want to say a quick thank you to Alertacall, who's this season's sponsor. A big thank you to them for helping put this together today so that we can keep this running free and open to everybody. But Claire, that was absolutely fascinating. I think it's very, very clear across the across everyone who's with us today that it's a conversation that probably could have run and run and run. And I'm really glad we're able to put it together so well. So a big thank you to you. A big thank you to everyone who could join us. The recording will be going live later. So if you missed anything today, please do let us know, because we can obviously follow up. Next week, Walsall Housing Group return for one of their health and housing sponsored pieces, so we can talk about that one. And I'll be sharing the details on that tomorrow. But for now, Claire, a massive thank you to you. The best of luck with everything with Tentacles for the near and far future. And a big thank you to everyone who could join us. Cheers.
Thank you. Bye-bye.